Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and in this Matters of Fate video I'm going to be talking about making a character using the Fate core rules. Now there's a couple of things that you'll find really useful during this, and one is the character sheet from the Fate core book, and number two is the character creation worksheet, which helps guide you through the process, and I'm going to put a link to all of those down below in the description of this video. They're all freely available to download. Now, in some RPGs, character creation can feel like a separate process to actually playing the game, or even something that you just have to get out of the way before you can actually dive into the fun bit of role-playing your character. This isn't the case with Fate. When you sit down to create a character, the process is designed to introduce you to rules concepts that will be needed later in the game. But more importantly than that, as your groups start to design your characters together, you're creating their stories and adding layers of detail and texture to the background of your campaign. Now, it is perfectly possible to have players create characters separately. However, in my opinion, the character creation system of Fate works at its best when the player creates their characters as a group with the support and input of their GM. Doing it this way also allows you to bounce ideas off each other and build on each other's ideas, creating a story and a background that binds the group together and also links the player characters into the campaign world. Collaborative character creation also allows the players to start getting comfortable with what they, the GM, and their fellow players are expecting from the game, preventing any unpleasant surprises a little bit further down the road. Now, we're going to go into detail about each step of character creation, but just so you know what to expect, here's a short summary of the creation process in Fate Core. Fate Accelerated and some other Fate-powered games may differ slightly, but they all follow roughly the similar creation process. And these are aspects: creating your character's high concept and trouble; name, giving your character a name; phase 1, describe your character's first adventure; phase 2 and 3, describe how you have crossed paths with 2 other characters; aspects, write down 1 aspect for each of the 3 phases; skills, choose and rate your skills; stunts, create 3 to 5 stunts or choose from the pre-created ones in the Fate Core rulebook; refresh, determine how many fate points you start with; and last but not least, stress and consequences, determine how much strain your character can take before they are taken out of action. So let's look at each of these steps in a little more detail. First of all, we'll look at the high concept and the trouble. Now, in order to create a character in Fate Core, you first need a central concept that defines your character, whether you be playing a hard-boiled detective, a vengeance-seeking vigilante, an optimistic space pirate, or any number of other possible concepts. We then make these ideas into aspects that can be used in your game. The high concept is a single sentence or phrase that sums up what your character is about, who he is, and what he does. It's one of the most important aspects since it focuses on the core of what defines your character, so make sure you end up with something you're happy with. Now, if you're struggling coming up with a high concept, you can always come back to it later in the character creation process. However, here are a few things to think about that might help you. Number 1, what sort of job does your character do? 2, who does your character work for? 3, does your character have any equipment or a vehicle that is important to them? 4, does your character hold a rank or position of importance? And 5, what abilities or powers make your character stand out from the everyday person? Now, please note, you'll have some other aspects as well, so you don't have to try and cram everything into the high concept. Some examples of high concepts, though, are socialite owner of a midnight dance club, undercover urban wizard, wisecracking starship captain, young polar explorer, or deposed monarch of the Sartan kingdom. Now, as well as a high concept, every character in a Fate game has some sort of trouble, and this is the main source of complication and conflict in their lives. It's something that drives them to get involved in interesting situations. And troubles are generally broken into 2 types: personal struggles and problematic relationships. Personal struggles are about your character overcoming their own impulses or struggling with their dark urges. For example, never met a drink I didn't like, gambling addict, or I just can't control my temper. Problematic relationships are those people or organisations that make life difficult or complicated for your player character. For example, the Brotherhood of Zyhad are hunting me, my brother took the throne and he won't rest until he's taken my life as well. Or 3, when I was young I accidentally summoned a spirit and now it haunts me. Troubles should not be easy to resolve, since it's not particularly interesting if a character can just quickly deal with it straight off the bat. But it shouldn't be something that renders the character entirely unplayable. It should be something that regularly complicates the player's life, but not to such an extent that they spend all of their time dealing with it or worrying about it, since if they're doing that they won't be able to get involved in exciting adventures and the strange situations that will occur in your campaign. Troubles also just shouldn't be the reverse or closely related to your high concept. For example, if you've taken Deposed Monarch as a high concept, then there's no point in taking I'm no longer on the throne as a trouble, since that's implicit and implied by the high concept. However, you can add details or make it personal, as with our example above, where we discover that our Deposed Monarch was betrayed by his brother, who now hunts it. At this point, it's important to discuss both your high concept and trouble with the GM and other players, just to make sure that you all understand what it means. Aspects will be used to advance plot and for you to gain and spend fate points in the game, so everyone needs to understand what the aspects cover. Normally this is only really a problem with very generic aspects or ones that are not particularly clear. For example, taking an aspect I'm destined for greatness looks fine at first glance, but it's very generic and says very little specifically about the character, whereas I'm destined to overthrow the Assassin Brotherhood of Zyhad is far more specific and has already started to add a few little details about organisations and NPCs in your campaign world. We're going to explore aspects in more detail later on in a different video, but for now it should suffice to know that the best aspects have both a positive side that can be evoked from the player to gain bonuses, and a negative side that can be compelled to complicate the character's life, and also is the way that characters and players gain additional fate points. For example, the aspect toughest criminal in the city has a positive side because the character has a fearsome reputation and obviously a high level of physical and criminal ability. However, it also comes with a negative aspect, since presumably they must be in almost constant trouble with the law and have a reputation with them to have attained such a noted reputation as the toughest criminal in the city, and other up-and-coming criminals may be looking to seize the top spot and knock them off it. Next, you should give your character an appropriate name. There are plenty of resources online for you to find inspiration for names, should you not have any ideas. And one I recommend that I use for NPC names in my game is behindthename.com, and I'll put a link to that down below. But a search on Google will reveal plenty more inspiration. So once you've got a name, we move on to the phase trio. And during this segment, you describe your character's first adventure and then how he or she crossed paths with 2 other characters, writing down an aspect for each of the experiences. Before you start doing the phase trio, you need to have worked out your high concept, your trouble, and your name. So if you've left any of those blank, go back and fill those in now and then come back to this. So assuming you've got all those sorted, the 3 remaining aspects beside your high concept and your trouble are created in the phase trio. The first phase is about recent background, some kind of adventure or interesting event. The second and the third are about how other characters got involved in that adventure and how you got involved in events in their life. The phase trio is an opportunity to create the background of your character and start building their story. Unlike some games that encourage you to create your background separately from, or even after character creation, Fate incorporates background creation as an integral part of the character design process. You also start building relationships with other characters, all before you even picked up a dice. Cool, huh? For each of the following phases, write down 2 things. 1, a summary of what happened in the phase, a couple of sentences should be fine, and 2, an aspect that reflects some part of the phase. So phase 1 is your adventure. It's your character's first real adventure, the first time they stepped outside the realm of the everyday. Now, if you have difficulty thinking of this, then have a look at your character's high concept and trouble. This should give you some ideas. For example, perhaps your first adventure was your character fighting his way out of the castle following his deposition from the throne, fleeing ahead of his brother's murderous guards. Or maybe your first adventure starts with your character in a bar, drowning his sorrows, getting drunk and getting involved in events that go over his head. Once you have an idea, write down a brief description and then an aspect. So with our deposed monarch example, we might say, for the description, Philip is confronted in the throne room by his traitorous brother Robert. The palace guard had been replaced by those loyal to his brother, and he's forced to flee the palace with the aid of Jonas, an aged guard captain who has remained loyal to him. And then looking through it, as an aspect, we might pick, when I reclaim my kingdom, I'll pay back Jonas what I owe him. If you're still struggling to come up with an idea for your character's first adventure, then there are a few things you can think about to help spur you on. And those are, your character may have confronted a challenge or problem in the adventure. If so, what was it? How did your character find out about it, and who did it involve? What did your character decide to do about the problem? Were they opposed or aided by anyone? Did your character win, lose, or perhaps only manage to escape with his or her life? It's generally best not to make the timing and the dating of when these events occurred too specific at first, since you want other characters to get involved in your adventures, to start building relationships between the group and bonds between the party. You can always define the dates or times in a little more detail at the end of the process if you wish. The Fate Core book recommends writing your first phase results on an index card so they can be traded with other players who can then add how they got involved by writing it down on the same index card. This can work well, however I found that some people find passing around the cards makes the connections seem a little forced. In this case it can work better to just have all your players create their initial adventures and then ask their fellows if anyone wants their character to have been involved in it. The two players can then discuss the extent of the involvement between them and record it for future reference. Phase 2 and 3 involve crossing paths with other characters. In these two phases, you link the group together by having other people's characters play minor or supporting roles in your adventure, and in turn you play a minor role in theirs. Once everyone has their initial adventure written down, pass the written summary over to another player. That other player has a supporting role in your adventure. Discuss it with them and then add a sentence or two to the summary about their involvement. Generally, there are a few common ways that supporting characters get involved. Either they increase the complication of the adventure or make resolution uncertain. For instance, perhaps while Philip is fleeing through the marketplace, he runs into a guard patrol who are following Kaz, a thief who stole from one of the stallholders. They can help resolve a situation, somehow solving a complication that occurred in the main adventure, or aiding the main character in overcoming the central issue. Perhaps the merchant Frederick helps smuggle Philip out of the kingdom in his cart of wares. Or you can have a combination of complicating and solving. The character either solves one situation but creates another, or creates a situation but later solves a different one. For example, Philip runs into Kaz, who is pursued by the city guard and is arrested, but later Kaz helps him escape from imprisonment. When you've written down the details, come up with an aspect for your character that covers it. For example, Kaz's player takes the aspect, I know all the secret ways in and out of the city jail, to reflect her role in the adventure. For phase 3, pass the index cards to different people and repeat the process. If you have less than 3 players, or you do not fancy using the phase trio, then it's perfectly reasonable for each player to just think of another 2 incidents that were important in their character's life and use them to create aspects. However, you should encourage your players to at least be involved in each other's background in some fashion, since this helps bond the party together. We now move on to skills, and picking your skills in Fate Core is fairly easy. A list of default skills can be found on the Fate system reference document, and I'll put a link to that in the description. And your skills form a pyramid with allocation done as follows. You have 1 great or +4 skill, 2 good or +3 skills, 3 fair plus 2 skills, and 4 average plus 1 skills. Any skills that you do not take have a default rating of mediocre or plus 0. There are some skills that provide additional benefits, such as extra stress boxes and or consequences, and these will be looked at in more detail later and in the skills video. We then move on to Stunts and Refresh. Characters begin with 3 stunts for free at character creation and can take up to 2 more stunts at the cost of lowering their refresh by 1 for each stunt beyond 3 that is taken. Basically, the more stunts you take, the more cool tricks and abilities you have. However, you will have less fate points at the start, so you're sacrificing a little versatility. Of course, you can always earn more fate points in-game by accepting compels. Actually creating stunts can take a little while, and this will be covered in detail in the Stunts and Skills video later. There's nothing wrong with leaving some of these blank and determining them in play if you're not sure at the start. A character in Fate starts with a refresh score of 3, and each character always begins a session with a minimum number of fate points equal to their refresh. If you have 4 stunts, your refresh will be 2, and if you have 5, your refresh will be 1 at the start of the game. Characters may never have a refresh rate of lower than 1. Next come stress and consequences, and these determine how much harm a character can sustain before being taken out of action. Each player character has a physical and mental stress track. The more boxes their tracks have, then the more resistant to physical and mental harm, as appropriate, they are. By default, a character has 2 boxes in each stress track. Each PC has 3 consequence slots by default. 1 mild, 1 moderate and 1 severe. Unlike stress, these are not split into physical and mental categories. The same consequences can be applied to any source of harm. So you might be asking, what is the difference between stress and consequences? Now this will be covered in more detail later, but to summarise it, stress represents the minor damage that can be shrugged off with a little rest, and it's recovered at the end of a scene. Whereas consequences represent lasting damage, broken limbs, mental problems, etc. that take time, patience and effort to recover from. Using the default skill list, certain skills add stress and consequence boxes at certain levels of ability. The physique skill helps with physical stress, and the will skill helps with mental stress. A score of average or fair gives 1 more stress box of the appropriate type. A score of good or higher gives 2 more stress boxes of the appropriate type. At superb +5 level or higher, they also give an additional mild consequence box. However, please note that unlike standard consequences, this consequence slot is specifically restricted to either physical harm if it was gained from physique, or mental harm if it was gained from will. Okay, so if you've been through all of this process, you should now have a character with a name, 5 aspects plus a backstory, 1 great, 2 good, 3 fair and 4 average skills, between 3 and 5 stunts, a mental and refresh stress track of 2 to 4 boxes each, and a refresh rate of 1 to 3 fate points. So as long as you've got all of that, your character is ready to go and start having adventures in Fate. So I hope if you've enjoyed this video, you consider clicking on like, giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel by clicking on the red dice up there. As always, if you have any comments, either put them in the comments box down below or hit me up in the Google Plus links. I do enjoy reading what you write. And until I see you next time, take care, thank you for watching and happy gaming.